By late afternoon, the light over Burlington thinned to pewter. Snow came in small, determined flakes that refused to hurry, each one a quiet insistence that winter had its own tempo. Street lamps popped on along the narrow side street, casting cones of amber across salt-slashed asphalt. Claire Monroe idled at the curb in her aging Subaru, heater chugging, wipers squeaking a tired metronome. Beyond the windshield, Jason Reed's rental sat hunched behind a ridge of plowed snow. 2 stories of tired clapboard, the basement windows filmed with condensation. She checked the dashboard clock, then the rear view for no reason, as if anything could sneak up on her through the white. Claire did this every other Sunday now, sat in a car that smelled faintly of school disinfectant and coffee, counting the minutes and making bargains with herself. This time will be better. This time she'll eat. This time she won't look so off. The door opened. Jason came first, shoulders squared inside a parka that had seen better winters, jaw set like he was walking into a deposition. Ella followed, swallowed by her marigold coat, hat sliding over one ear, the straps of a small backpack digging into her shoulders. The child's steps were careful, deliberate, the way kids move when they have a stomachache and don't want to jostle anything. "Hey," Jason said, leaning toward the passenger window as the flakes salted his hair. He tried on a smile that didn't hold. "She's fine, just tired. We did the aquarium yesterday." "Hi," Claire managed, already unbuckling her seatbelt and reaching back to open the rear door. "Hi, Bug." Ella crawled in, slow as frost. And the moment the car closed around her, Claire smelled it. The damp basement breath of places that never quite dry out. Not the usual winter wet of wool and slush, but something older. Mildew and radiator heat. A sour thread that lived at the seam of fabric and time. "There we go," Claire murmured, easing the backpack off and sliding it to the floor. The coat. Zipper snagged. She freed it and tried not to flinch at the small roundness pressing against the coat lining. A 6-year-old belly should be soft, sure, but this was different. Taut, like a drum under knit. "We're good?" Jason asked, hands jammed in his pockets, trying to meet Claire's eyes and not quite getting there. "Did she eat?" Claire said. Neutral. Always neutral. You learned the hard way that any hint of accusation was lighter fluid. She wasn't. "Hungry," he said. "You know how she gets when she's excited." "Excited," Claire repeated and let it hang. Jason's mouth twitched. "Heat's been finicky. The landlord says he'll have someone out. It's winter. Things happen. Sure," Claire said. She fastened Ella's buckle, careful with the strap across that little belly. "Thanks for bringing her out." He hesitated, then rapped twice on the roof with his knuckles. "See you in 2 weeks, Elle." To Claire, "I'm following up on those job leads. It's just—" "Of course," she said, already pulling away from the curb, the Subaru crunching over granulated snow. The mirror gave her Jason for a second, thin, stubborn, a man trying to look like he wasn't worried. Ella sagged into the booster, thumb skating along the fog her breath made on the window. Claire turned the heat higher, the vents a dry roar, and glanced back whenever she could without telegraphing it. "How's your tummy?" she asked. "Okay," Ella whispered, voice papery. "A little full. Did you have dinner?" "I had crackers." "Crackers." Claire swallowed. "Any soup, macaroni, apples?" Ella shook her head. "The couch is cold," she added after a minute, like she was describing the weather. "And the blanket smells like downstairs." Claire let that sit. The smell had moved from Ella's coat to every inch of the car now, lacing itself into the fabric of the evening. She rolled the window down a fraction, letting in air that bit her teeth. Lake Champlain's wind tucked its fingers under the car door and tried to pry. "Do you want to go home and get a bath?" she asked. "Warm water. Bubbles." Ella nodded. Once, small and solemn. The drive took 10 minutes. The city had salted well, plows prowled the main drag like patient animals. They passed the school, its windows black, the playground humped with snow like sleeping whales. Claire could feel the outline of her day dissolving, laundry abandoned in a heap, the lesson plans she needed to print for Monday curdling in her bag. Her mind had shifted instantly, as it always did on handoff days, into its alert, Tight focus. Mode. Observe, record. Keep the child comfortable, do not escalate. At home, the front steps were dusted with new snow and the porch light turned flakes to sparks. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and the faint sweetness of crayons. Ella stood obediently as Claire peeled her out of layers, her little body cool to the touch. When the undershirt came off, the belly stood out more plainly beneath the heart print. Leggings. Not distended the way a pediatrician would write in a chart, maybe. But not right. A tautness with its own weather. "What do you think about penguin pajamas?" Claire asked, keeping her voice bright. "Easy." "Okay. Bath first," Claire said, and set the water running hot enough to steam. In the bathroom's fogging mirror, Claire watched Ella's reflection. The way she kept a hand on her stomach like she could steady it from the outside. When the tub was ready, Ella climbed in and melted, eyelids sinking. Claire washed her gently. The habit of years, listening to the house, furnace clicking on, a plow beeping as it backed somewhere beyond the maple in the yard. The smell clung even in steam, faint but stubborn, a tenant who had no intention of moving. After bath and penguins, Claire made chicken noodle soup and set a bowl on the little blue placemat with the faded geese. Ella prodded noodles, took 2 small bites, and pushed the spoon aside. "I'm sleepy," she said. "You can be," Claire told her, kissing her damp hair. She led her to bed and tucked the quilt to her chin. "If your belly hurts more, call me." "Okay." Claire stood for a long moment, listening to her daughter's breath smooth out. Then she went to the kitchen, pulled the black moleskin from the junk drawer, and wrote the date. Her handwriting looked like it had in college. Neat until it wasn't. Under the date she wrote, "Kojugi sai hong de chila kamlan." She stared at the sentence until the words blurred and added below, "Sunday. Pick up 5:12 p.m. Smell, damp, musty, clothes and backpack. Belly appears round, tight to sight and touch. Food intake at Dad's. Crackers. Energy level, low. Pattern? Every other Sunday, similar." She set the pen down and rubbed her eyes. In the drying rack, a single coffee mug waited. She turned it upside down again just to have something to do. The refrigerator hummed with bureaucratic confidence. On its door, school memos listed pizza days and snow day procedures. A magnet held a grocery list and the pediatric practice card, Naomi Chen, MD, in blue sans serif. The phone vibrated, a voicemail icon. Claire thumbed it on and listened to an automated voice she barely heard. The dentist office reminding her of next week's cleaning. Then another, older message from 3 days ago. "Claire, it's Ruth," the voice said, warm with a Midwestern vowel and something like impatience braided with worry. "I've been trying to reach Jason and he's not picking up. I know it's not my business, but, well, call me if you need anything. I'll be in Burlington later this month." Click, Claire. Let the phone rest on the counter. Ruth Reed, who wrote birthday cards in looping cursive and scolded gently, who had once told Claire in a quiet corner of a Thanksgiving kitchen that stubbornness runs on the Reed side like maple sap. Ruth, who Jason didn't want to see. The basement. Claire pictured the older woman in a wool coat at some bus station, hands wrapped around a paper cup. She rinsed Ella's backpack in the sink and stopped. The water that bled from the fabric was clean. The smell was not. She pinched the shoulder strap to her nose and it was all there again. That old damp, the kind that happens when a room breathes through soil instead of air. She dried her hands, went back to the journal and added, "We'll call Dr. Chen in the morning. Ask about stool test. Record weight, appetite, pain scale." She stood a moment longer, then reached for the tape measure she used for hemming, and lay it flat on the counter. Not because she intended to measure anything tonight, but because the ritual of tools brought her down from the anxiety's thin altitude. Upstairs, Ella turned in her sleep and made a small sound. Claire set the measure aside and climbed the stairs, the houseboard speaking under her feet. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter the way you look at a shoreline you know better than your own mind. Every indentation familiar. Every new line of tide a warning and a promise. Tomorrow morning, she told herself. No more notes in a drawer, no more hopes that the pattern would break itself. She would call Dr. Naomi Chen as soon as the office opened. She would use every careful word, and if careful didn't work, she would use the other kind. Whatever explanation existed, she would find it in the bright, impersonal light of a clinic room that smelled like antiseptic and cherry lollipops, not in the guessing dark of a winter kitchen. Downstairs, the furnace kicked on again, a reliable heart in a house that had been asked to be brave. Outside, the snow kept making its slow, tireless argument. Claire closed the journal, set the pediatrician's card on top of it, and left everything where she could find it in the morning. The pediatric clinic held winter at bay with hot air and lemon antiseptic. Claire and Ella stamped snow from there, boots on the black rubber mat, coats unzipped, cheeks burnished with cold. A fish mobile turned quietly above the reception desk. The tank below gurgled under blue light, oblivious to snow squalls and custody calendars. Monroe for Ella Reed, Claire told the receptionist, passing over the insurance card with hands she wished were steadier. Got you, the woman said, glancing at the screen. You've seen Dr. Chen before, and urgent care twice since October? She smiled at Ella. We'll be quick. In the exam room, the paper on the table crackled as Ella climbed up. She curled around Mr. Otter, a stuffed thing from some field trip, and watched the poster of fruits and vegetables with theatrical boredom. Claire shrugged out of her coat and sat, shivering in the relief and dread that followed making a decision you could no longer unmake. Dr. Naomi Chen arrived like a frontline officer, hair pulled back, headlamp clipped to the collar of her white coat instead of her head, hands already clean, 45 going on indestructible. Her eyes were the kind that noticed things and kept noticing. Hi, Ella, she said, warm but not sing-song. I like your penguins. Thank you, Ella whispered. And hi, Mom. To Claire. You wrote last night. I'm glad you came. And today, no judgment in the sentence, only fact. Tell me what you're seeing, Claire told her. The belly, the smell, the crackers, the fatigue that gathered like snow on the same days on the same schedule. As she talked, Dr. Chen didn't interrupt. She listened the way good doctors do, attention like a steady beam. Okay, Dr. Chen said when Claire finished. Ella, I'm going to examine your belly, and then we'll take some pictures. I think we may be dealing with a gastrointestinal infection, possibly parasitic. We'll also order a stool study. She warmed her hands under the tap before touching Ella. The exam was gentle, precise, a stethoscope tracing soft circles, fingers pressing with the kindness of someone who knew exactly how much the small body could bear. Ella winced at the right lower quadrant and again near the center. Her belly was tight under the skin, a drum asked to hold too much. Any fever? Dr. Chen asked. Low grade last Monday, Claire said. 99.9. Tylenol worked. How about weight changes, appetite? Down 2 pounds since her checkup, Claire said, surprising herself with how quickly the numbers came. Appetite normal at my house, but after weekends. She didn't finish. Dr. Chen nodded once, wrote efficiently, then tapped the computer keys. Let's get a quick ultrasound to look for bowel wall thickening or fluid. It won't diagnose a parasite by itself, but it helps. And I want stool O&P, OV, and parasites over 2 days, and a Giardia cryptosporidium antigen test. I'll also run a CBC and CMP. The tech wheeled in the compact ultrasound machine. Gel was a brief, bright cold on Ella's skin. The room lights dimmed to dusk. On the screen, gray swam into gray. Loops, shadows, the private world beneath a 6-year-old's laugh. Dr. Chen watched in silence, freezing frames, measuring. Claire stared at the monitor and saw nothing and everything. We're seeing some bowel wall thickening, Dr. Chen said finally, keeping her voice neutral, steady. There's mild free fluid. It tracks with your history and my exam. This does not look like an acute surgical belly. It does look like inflammation. The machine beeped softly. Claire found her fingers pressed flat on the edge of the table, as if bracing against a slow-moving wave. Dr. Chen cleaned the gel, then handed Claire a small paper bag with labeled vials and a plastic spoon. This is a stool collection kit, she said straightforward. 2 samples, 24 hours apart. Keep them refrigerated. The lab downstairs will take them. I know it's not glamorous, it's necessary. Claire nodded, throat tight. We'll do it. I'm also going to pull her utilization history, Dr. Chen said, eyes on the screen again. Our records show an urgent care visit on October 9th for abdominal pain and nausea, then again November 13th. Both were Mondays. Both notes say symptoms started yesterday evening. Was she with her father those weekends? Yes, Claire said. The word felt like a confession, and a key. Okay, Dr. Chen said, tapping the keyboard. I'm documenting a pattern of recurrent GI symptoms in proximity to visitation. I'm not saying cause. I am saying correlation. That matters. Dr. Chen printed the visit summary, then turned the monitor to show Claire the EMR timeline. Small blue dots for office visits, orange triangles for urgent care, a neat corporate depiction of a messy child's life, dates lined up with a custody schedule Claire could recite backwards in the dark. Because of what you've reported, Dr. Chen said, and what I'm seeing, and because there may be environmental factors, state law requires that I make a report to Child Protective Services. It's called mandated reporting. It isn't an accusation. It's a request for a safety assessment. Claire felt the word required, like a gust through an open door. She inhaled and nodded, grateful and terrified in equal measure. Will this make things worse for her? Dr. Chen hesitated the right amount, then answered, Their mandate is safety. A caseworker will contact you and likely request to inspect the father's residence. They may interview you, Ella, and Dad. It can feel intrusive, but it brings resources, and sometimes leverage to improve conditions. Ella watched both women with the solemnity of children who understand more than adults think. Do I have to get a shot? She asked. Not today, Dr. Chen said, the edge of a smile finally arriving. Just a little blood test. You'll get a sticker, maybe two. The nurse came with a cartoon-printed tourniquet and the practiced kindness of someone who draws blood from small arms every day. Ella stared at the goldfish sticker on the wall and squeezed Claire's fingers until the needle was out and the cotton taped down. When they were finished, Claire's phone buzzed. A voicemail. She stepped into the hall to listen. Claire, it's Ruth. The older woman's voice, that braid of impatience and care. Jason still isn't picking up. I'm not trying to interfere, but I can hear it in your messages. You're scared. If you need me, I can come sooner. I'll make the arrangements. Burlington's not Mars. A pause, softening. Give Ella a kiss for me. Claire pressed the phone to her chest for a second, then returned to the room where Ella sat with two stickers, goldfish and a penguin, stacked like medals. Dr. Chen was finishing her note. I've submitted the report, she said, without ceremony. You may hear from CPS within 24 to 72 hours. If Ella's abdominal pain escalates, if she develops high fever, persistent vomiting, or blood in stool, you go to the ER. Otherwise, we're on the right path. Bring those samples in. We'll call with preliminary results. Thank you, Claire said, and meant more than the words held. Outside, winter had tightened its grip. The sky had the pale underside of a fish. Claire buckled Ella into the Subaru and for a moment just sat, forehead against the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick. Something had shifted. Not relief, but an end to guessing. They were halfway home when the call came. Unknown number. Claire answered on speaker. Ms. Monroe, this is Miguel Alvarez with Child Protective Services, a calm voice said, the kind that could walk into other people's lives and leave most of their walls standing. Dr. Chen submitted a report this morning. First, I want you to know our assessment is about safety and services. I'd like to schedule an interview with you and, if appropriate, with Ella, in a setting where she's comfortable. Of course, Claire said, glancing at the rear view where Ella traced a circle in fog with one careful finger. When? Soon, Miguel said. I'm also required to conduct a home visit at the father's residence. Can you provide the address? Claire gave it. A string of numbers and a street she could picture even with her eyes closed. Clapboard tired, basement windows sweating. Miguel repeated it back. I'll contact Mr. Reed separately, he said. For you and Ella, I can meet at your home this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Whatever causes the least disruption. Tomorrow morning, Claire said. She thought of the vials in the paper bag, the journal on the kitchen counter, the furnace's reliable heart. 9. 9 is good, Miguel said. I'll bring my ID and some paperwork that explains the process. For now, keep doing what you're doing. Document, and try to have a quiet evening. The call ended. Claire closed the phone and let the heater fill the car with warm, slightly dusty air. Beside her, the world outside blurred white and clearer. White. Behind her, Ella hummed to Mr. Otter under her breath. Who was that? Ella asked. A helper, Claire said. Someone who makes sure kids are safe. Ella considered this, then nodded, satisfied with the existence of such people. Claire turned onto their street, the tires crunching over yesterday's tracks. Snow fell in patient, tireless arguments. Tomorrow there would be a man with a notebook and a badge at her kitchen table, and soon there would be footsteps on the basement stairs across town. Home, Claire said, mostly to herself, and pulled in under the porch light's warm circle. As the day finally let go, Miguel Alvarez arrived on time, which comforted Claire in a way she hadn't expected. He stood on her porch in a navy peacoat dusted with snow, a leather portfolio in one hand, his badge clipped to the outer pocket. Like a gentle warning, he was 40 or so, trim, with the composed face of someone who had learned to move through strangers' private messes without knocking anything over. Ms. Monroe, he said, lifting the badge for form. Miguel Alvarez, Child Protective Services. Is Ella okay to stay here with your neighbor for an hour? Mrs. Bennett's waiting next door, Claire said. Ella's reading to her cat. It's a two-way relationship. He smiled briefly. Then let's go. The street to Jason's place was still ridged with last night's plow lines, tire troughs shining with a skin of ice. Burlington's winter had teeth this week, the air so sharp that Claire's lungs felt scraped with every breath. Jason's building crouched at the bottom of a slight slope, 3 windows of the basement level half buried in a bank where the plow had thrown snow and city grit. The clapboard siding needed paint yesterday. A raw wood handrail flaked under Claire's glove as she descended to the side entrance. Miguel rapped politely and stepped back to give the peephole space. A chain slid. The door opened halfway. Jason's face appeared in the gap, unshaven, a defensive squint already in place. We weren't expecting, I called, Miguel said, even and courteous. Left a message and a text. Mr. Reed, I'm Miguel Alvarez with CPS. I'd like to ask a few questions and do a quick safety assessment. It's voluntary, but if today isn't good, we'll need to reschedule soon. May we come in? Jason lifted his chin. A long 2 count. Then the chain clicked. Fine, it's a mess. The basement apartment met them with a flat breath of damp. Not wet winter wool damp, but water that lives here damp. The kind that breeds. The kind that never really leaves. A narrow hallway led to a sitting room with a fold-out couch, a 2-burner kitchenette, a doorless bathroom tucked under the stairs. The ceiling tiles were stained in the corners as if the room had been crying from above. Thank you for letting us in, Miguel said, voice neutral. He unclipped a phone the size of a slim camera, and after asking permission, took a photo of the living room from the doorway. Just wide shots, no personal documents, Jason shrugged. Whatever helps check boxes. Miguel set his portfolio on the small counter and pulled out a clear zip bag with labeled vials, a pair of nitrile gloves, and a chain of custody form. Mr. Reed, I'll ask some questions while I take samples. Where does Ella usually sleep? The couch, Jason said, bristling a little. It pulls out. I put an extra blanket on it. Claire looked at the couch, a plaid relic pressed up against the cinder block wall. The blanket lay folded at the foot, a brown and cream acrylic that had known other basements. The air above the upholstery carried a sweetness that wasn't sweet, the way old damp tries to smuggle itself as nostalgia. And meals, Miguel asked. What do you usually prepare for her? Jason set his jaw. We eat. Cereal, grilled. Cheese. Sometimes she's not hungry. He looked at Claire. You know how she is when she's excited. Miguel nodded without agreeing. He moved to the kitchenette. The sink faucet coughed before it ran. At first, the water came out tea-colored, then cleared to something that still wasn't clear. Miguel held a sterile bottle under the stream, filled to the line, capped it, and sealed the cap with a tamper strip. He labeled the vial, address, tap, kitchen, 10:42 a.m. He did the same with the bathroom sink, and again with the shower head. After flushing it first, the shower groaned awake and ran brown for a long minute, as if coaxing rust from a throat. Claire stood near the doorway, arms folded against herself that had nothing to do with cold. The bathroom had no window. The fan was a grill clogged with lint. On the back wall, moisture had tattooed a bruise of black mold along the grout seams. A patch of drywall near the floor had peeled back like a hangnail, soft as bread. It's winter, Jason said behind her, hearing her silence. It's a basement. Houses sweat in Vermont. The landlord's supposed to bring a dehumidifier. Miguel crouched at a pipe elbow under the sink where a slow drip had lacquered a path. Down the cabinet's pressboard, he took a picture without commentary, then another of a baseboard with a chalky bloom. Mr. Reed, he said gently, do you use this water for drinking? Jason hesitated half a beat. We boil it when it looks funny. How often is that? Miguel asked, pen poised. Jason's eyes flicked to Claire and away. Sometimes. Miguel made his note on the form. Parent reports occasional discoloration, intermittent boiling. He took swabs from the inside of a glass near the sink and from the refrigerator shelf where a plastic pitcher sat half full. He bagged each swab like a small secret. Ella likes the aquarium downtown, Jason said suddenly as if offering a receipt. We went Saturday. She liked the jellyfish. She was fine then. I'm glad you had a good time, Miguel said, and meant it. I'm here to help make sure she's fine the day after, too. Jason's mouth thinned. He stepped back and folded his arms, shoulders bumping the wall like he needed to feel something solid behind him. Pride stood up in him like another man taller and more brittle. He loved his daughter. That fact radiated off him like embarrassment and heat. But love, Claire thought. Love didn't sterilize water. Miguel finished labeling and slid the vials into a rigid cooler, initialed the chain of custody form, and had Jason sign as a witness. Lab will run Giardia and crypto-antigen screens, he said. We'll also check for coliforms, turbidity, and basic chemistry. We'll share results with you. Jason gave a short nod. It's the city pipes, he said, like he wanted the words recorded. I can complain all day. Nobody. Comes I put in tickets, I got numbers. We'll ask the landlord for maintenance logs, Miguel said, perfectly calm. I'll also need to know who watches Ella if you work late. Jason's face went tight in a way Claire recognized. Muscle memory for deflecting the hard question. I'm between jobs, he said too quickly. It's not like that. Miguel didn't press. Okay, thank you for your time, Mr. Reed. I may need to follow up. At the door, the cold came in around them like a moral. Claire stepped into it gratefully. Miguel paused on the steps and scribbled something short on his pad. I know that. Felt like an indictment, he said. Low enough that only Claire heard. It's an assessment. If there are conditions here that could make a child sick, we note them and help correct them. That's all today is. Thank you, Claire said, breath making ghosts. Document what you see and when, Miguel said. What she eats, energy, symptoms. You're doing the right things. He glanced back at the half-buried windows. We'll talk when the lab calls. The call came late that afternoon, as Claire rinsed out Ella's penguin cup in warm water that ran clear. Ella was on the rug building a fort for Mr. Otter, narrating in a barely there voice about a winter forest and a brave river. Ms. Monroe, Miguel said, his voice again an anchor. Preliminary results just in from the state lab. The kitchen. Tap sample is positive on the Giardia antigen screen. The bathroom sink is also positive. The shower sample is flagged for turbidity and will be run for cyst concentration. We'll have confirmatory numbers within 48 hours, But this is significant. Claire closed her eyes. She saw brown water turning to the color of nothing, and still not meaning safe. She saw Ella's hand resting on her belly like a little old lady. "Thank you," she said. The words felt too small. "I'll file an addendum to my report tonight," Miguel said. "Given the pattern Dr. Chen documented, and this environmental finding, we'll recommend immediate remediation, alternative water source, filtration, possibly relocation, until the landlord resolves the issue. I'll also schedule a formal interview with Ella at your home with you present, short and non-leading. Tomorrow still works?" "Yes," Claire said. 9. After he hung up, Claire leaned against the counter, palms flat on laminate as if steadying a table no one else could feel sway. The furnace hummed its steady heart. The house was so clean she could smell the line where lemon cleaner became air. Ella looked up from her fort. "Mommy?" Claire crossed the room and knelt until they were eye level. "Hey," she said, smoothing hair back from the small face. "Do you think Mr. Otter would like some soup?" "Mr. Otter likes soup," Ella said solemnly. Then more, quietly. "The couch at Daddy's is cold." Claire felt the line of the day pull taut again. "I know." "Blanket smells like downstairs," Ella said, searching Claire's face for the right word. "Like old water." Claire nodded. "You're good at words," she said. "And at pictures." Ella's eyes brightened a notch. Drawing was how she made sense when words fuzzed. Claire had a sudden clear thought that slid into place like a puzzle piece. Ask her to show it. Show me the room. Show me the couch. Show me what the smell looks like. "After dinner," Claire said, keeping her voice a casual promise. "Maybe you can draw me the aquarium and Daddy's living room. I want to see the jellyfish and the couch. Can you put the blanket in the picture too?" "Okay," Ella said, pleased with the assignment. She tucked Mr. Otter under a paper towel snowbank and went to wash her hands. In the sink, water ran clear and innocent. Claire watched it, then looked down at her own hands, clean, dry, smelling faintly of soap. She thought of the basement's breath, the bruised grout, the way the shower coughed up tea before it could speak. She thought of Jason's face when Miguel asked about work, the quick flinch of pride, the love tangled up in it like fishing line in a propeller. On the fridge, Dr. Chen's card looked almost ceremonial between pizza day and a coloring page. Snowman. Claire picked up her journal from the counter and wrote the date. Positive water antigen screen for Giardia. Kitchen and bathroom at father's residence. Ella reports couch is cold. Blanket smells like downstairs old water. She set the pen down. In the living room, Ella had arranged crayons by shade. Midnight blue to glacier, moss to mold. Claire didn't correct the last pairing. Some truths chose their own names. Tomorrow there would be more questions and, if she was lucky, better answers. Tonight there would be soup and drawing, and the quiet discipline of paying attention to what a child tried to tell you in color and line. Claire set the crayons out like a color wheel and slid a fresh sheet of paper across the kitchen table. The house was a small, bright ship on a cold sea. Furnace humming, kettle ticking itself to sleep, lemons in a bowl pretending it was June. Outside, Burlington's afternoon had folded into early dusk. The window glass held a faint mirror of the room, and in it Claire's face looked older than this morning. Ella chose midnight blue first. She tilted her head in the small, purposeful way she had when drawing, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, then began with a rectangle that leaned as if the snow had pushed one of its shoulders. She filled it with patchy swaths of green-gray. "This is Daddy's house," she said without looking up. "Okay," Claire said, low and easy. Miguel's voice echoed in her mind. "Document, don't lead." She took the moleskin from the counter and opened to today's date. "And this is the room," Ella continued, pressing harder. The rectangle sprouted a smaller rectangle. That couch, Claire thought, and a smudge that looked like a shadow or a stain. Ella added small black ovals, skittering along the edge of the couch and around a boxy bed shape. Legs, antennae, the determined dot work of a child who has studied a thing too closely. Claire felt something cold slide under her ribs. "You're doing a good job with details," she said. "What are those?" "Bugs," Ella said matter-of-factly. "They run fast when the light turns on." The word sat on the table like a small, heavy object. Claire's hand moved in quiet reflex. Date, time, drawing subject. Father's living room bed. Child includes multiple insects around sleeping area. Reports movement when light is on. Ella drew a little stick girl near the door, outside the house. Lines. The girl had a round belly and no smile. "This is me," she said, tapping, then tapped the darkness inside the rectangle. "Sometimes I sit here. I don't want to go in." "Because?" "It's cold," Ella said. She picked up gray and scraped it over the couch. "And bumpy air, like the air is fuzzy on my teeth." Claire nodded. She did not trust her throat. "Do you want some more light?" she offered, turning the dimmer up until the kitchen went from evening to afternoon. "Mm-hmm," Ella said, approving. She reached for Brown to draw a blanket, a rectangle on the couch rectangle, the way a map might mark a dangerous country. She picked up green and darkened the corners of the room. "Down here," she said, indicating along the floor line. "It's black-green." "Like under a rock," Claire said, thinking of the grout in the bathroom. "Like a pond," Ella said, satisfied with her own metaphor. Claire rose to fetch more paper towels and noticed Ella's marigold sweater folded over the back of the nearest chair, sleeves tucked into the body like sleeping hands. She lifted it to hang on a hook and felt through the knit, something that wasn't sweater, a slight papery weight at the seam. Her thumb found a bump along the hem. She turned, the sweater inside out. A small brown body dropped onto the table with a sound too light to be audible, a tiny punctuation of the day. It lay on its back, legs folded in at precise angles, as if drawn by a child with a ruler. It was no abstract bug, but a roach. Unmistakable, a glossy shield for a head, a segmented cathedral of a thorax. Dead, but not for long. Claire didn't gasp, exactly. The air went out of her like a door closing against wind. She reached for a sandwich baggie from the drawer, hands so calm she didn't recognize them as hers, and slid the roach inside with a folded index card like a makeshift stretcher. The bag clicked shut. She wrote on the card with the fine tip, Sharpie she kept for permission slips. Roach found inside hem of child sweater after visit. Date, time, father's residence. She held the bag up to the light. The roach floated in its clear rectangle as plainly as any evidence cutaway on a TV drama. Ella watched, curious but not alarmed. "I saw one in my sock," she said, as if reporting a cloud's shape. "But it ran away." Claire put the bag on the counter like a small truth under glass. "If you ever see one on you," she said, keeping her voice steady, "you can brush it off and come tell me, okay?" "Okay." Ella colored the stick girl's belly rounder, shading carefully. Then with a flourish she drew a little person on the couch with a rectangle in his lap and orange scribbles around his head, which Claire recognized as headphones. "That's Jimmy," she said, pleased with the likeness. "He plays games. All the time. He doesn't make dinner." The name didn't land at first. It vibrated in the air like a tuning fork, then resolved. "Who's Jimmy?" Claire asked, neutral as she could make it. "Jimmy," Ella repeated, as if the knowledge should be mutual. "He lives near Daddy. He watches me when Daddy goes to the store. He says I can have crackers because the pan is dirty." Crackers. The word from last night's journal entry stepped out of the sentence in her head and stood in the kitchen. Claire wrote in the notebook, "Child names Jimmy as caregiver during father's absences. Reports video games, plus lack of cooking due to dirty pan. Did not prompt. Foreshadow." Heat rose up Claire's throat like she had swallowed a mouthful of snow too fast. Pride and love warred in her chest with anger. At the building, at the landlord, at the way an adult's bad week could turn into a child's stomach. Ella pressed a final smudge into the drawing and leaned back to examine her work. The house slouched in its paper winter. Bugs marched along the bed. The little girl stood outside the door, round-bellied and small. her stick arms held slightly away from her body the way Ella held her own when she was deciding whether to run or stand still. "I don't want to go anymore," Ella said abruptly, not looking at Claire but at the stick girl. The sentence surprised them both with its adultness. Her eyes were dry. The fury in her was clean, like the snap of new ice. "It's cold and it's dirty." Claire reached across the table and put her hand over the small hand holding Brown. "I hear you," she said. "Thank you for telling me." Ella nodded. The moment passed as quickly as it had arrived. She reached for yellow and, like a child who instinctively tries to fix the world with color, drew a sun in the upper corner that didn't belong to any house in Vermont today. Claire took a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She slid the drawing gently to one side to dry and turned to practicals. She labeled a file folder Evidence and tucked the bagged roach and a copy of the Water Lab's preliminary note inside. She copied the day's journal page on the printer and slipped the copy into the folder too, redundancies against the chaos of memory. Somewhere in the act of filing, her heart slowed to something near normal. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Miguel, hi," she answered, tipping her face away so Ella couldn't read anything on it. "Quick update," Miguel said, voice steady. "As winter. I've spoken with the landlord. He claims he's aware of moisture issues and has scheduled a dehumidifier delivery. I've requested maintenance logs. Tomorrow morning I'll be canvassing the building for collateral interviews, neighbors, who can speak to conditions and routines. If they consent, I'll record audio statements. I'll also try to identify any other caretakers. There's a name that's come up twice, a Jimmy. Does that ring a bell?" Claire watched Ella add tiny jellyfish in the air above the couch, a child's mercy in the composition. "It does," she said, quiet. "Ella mentioned him just now." "Understood," Miguel said, taking the information without letting it break the conversation's surface. "I'll proceed carefully. I'll document and circle back. We'll keep this factual." "Thank you," Claire said. "My pleasure isn't the right phrase," Miguel said, a glint of dry humor sneaking through. "But you know what I mean. I'll call after the interviews." When she hung up, Claire put the phone down next to the evidence folder and watched her daughter draw herself a son. Family, she thought, was sometimes nothing more glamorous than the work of naming what is true. A room that breathes damp. Water that looks like tea before it looks like water. A man who loves his child and cannot quite bring himself to look at the thing that is making her sick. And a little girl who knows how to stand outside a door when a room doesn't feel safe, and who knows how to tell it in lines and color. "Do you think the jellyfish need a pond?" Ella asked, studying her improbable sky. "I think jellyfish can swim anywhere in art," Claire said. "But we'll find a better pond for you." Ella seemed satisfied. She added a wobbly fence around the house, then stopped and frowned. "I forgot the blanket," she said softly and drew it darker, as if blankets could weigh as much as rooms. The furnace clicked on again, faithful. Snow brushed the windows like someone trying to whisper through glass. Claire slipped the drawing into a clear sleeve to protect it and set it beside the folder with its less gentle truths. Tomorrow there would be neighbors' voices on a recorder. Tonight there would be a child's picture telling the same story first. Miguel's pen made a soft hollow sound as it tapped the consent line. "This just says I'm recording with your permission," he told the woman in the upstairs unit, his voice the same patient register he'd used with Claire. "You can stop at any time." Mrs. Klein was tiny and unsentimental, a Vermont original in a cardigan the color of winter tomatoes. Steam from a kettle threaded the dim kitchen. A geranium leaned into the gray window like a listener. She adjusted. Her glasses signed where he pointed and sat with her palms flat on the oilcloth. Miguel set a palm-sized recorder and a micro-cassette on the table, dated it in clean block letters and pressed record. A red eye glowed. "This is collateral interview number 1, he narrated for the tape, reading the address, the date, and the time. "Present are Mrs. Deborah Klein and Miguel Alvarez with the Department for Children and Families, Burlington. District. Mrs. Klein, do you consent to being recorded?" "I do," she said, not nervous so much as tired. Can you describe what you've observed regarding the unit downstairs? Mrs. Klein lifted one shoulder. Old building, she began. The way people do when they want you to know they understand more than they're saying. Smells like a root cellar when the snow comes. I've told the landlord, 3 times about the damp. You see it on the baseboards, black in the corners. Miguel let the silence show he was listening. The gentleman, Jason, moved in. Last spring, she said. Quiet. Keeps to himself, tries to be polite. But since October I hear more noise on Sundays. Raised voices. Not like rage, but like a pot boiling. Then quiet. Then a little girl crying. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling, hearing ghosts. Different kind of crying, not a tantrum, tired. Have you seen the child? Miguel asked. Just in passing. Sweet thing. Sunday nights late. The couch creaks under them walking. Sometimes I smell. It's like old water. You know that smell? Basement sink after a thaw. Miguel made a note on his pad without breaking the rhythm of the recording. You mentioned a landlord. Has anyone placed work orders? I call the number taped in the lobby, Mrs. Klein said. They send a boy who looks like he should be in algebra. He props the door with a screwdriver and tells me they'll bring a dehumidifier. That was November. Anyone else in the downstairs unit besides Mr. Reed and the child? Miguel kept the question open. Mrs. Klein nodded once. A tall boy, 18 maybe. Headphones like earmuffs. Comes and goes at odd hours. Sometimes I hear a video game, the zap sound late. The little one crying. The boy doesn't cook. I know cooking smells. She sniffed, a small proud sound. I know when someone is feeding a child and when they are not. Miguel let the tape gather the last sentence and clicked stop. He labeled the cassette with a tiny square of white tape, number 1 Klein. The door across the hall was answered by a woman with a baby on her hip and a bandana tied over her hair. She shifted the baby, read the badge without fear, and stepped back to let Miguel into an apartment that smelled like cumin and laundry. Soap. I'm Anita Romero, she said. My husband's on days. What do you need? Again, the consent form, the dated microcassette, the read-in. The baby gurgled at the red light. Do you know your downstairs neighbor? Miguel asked. Jason? A little. Anita hooked a foot under a bouncy seat to keep it moving. He's proud. Says he doesn't need help, but also asks if we have extra trash bags. I hear his girl sometimes. I think he loves her. I think he's drowning. Have you noticed anyone else at Mr. Reed's when the child is present? Yeah, Anita. Nodded, resolute. Jimmy. He's the landlord's nephew or the neighbor's kid, I forget. 18, 19. Headphones. He brings over a console, sits on the couch like it's a job. I've knocked when it gets loud. He opens with the headset around his neck and says, My bad, Mrs. R. I ask if the girl ate. He says they had crackers. Miguel kept his tone even. How often? Couple weekends a month since Halloween, she said. I don't go looking for trouble, but I hear things. You know how sound travels down here? It slides along pipes. I can tell when a pan hits water. I can tell when it doesn't. Thank you, Miguel said, and meant it. He asked 2 more questions he asks everywhere. Have you seen pests? Have you seen water discoloration? And Anita answered both with the same resigned yes. We had a roach in our tub last week, she said, embarrassed for her own housekeeping. I keep it clean. Bugs don't read leases. He clicked stop again. 2. Romero joined the Jennifer 1. Klein in the clear case. By late afternoon, a pale sun had given up pretending, and dusk allowed winter to admit what it was. Miguel drove to Claire's house with the microcassettes in a small plastic envelope with duplicates. He had transcribed shorthand highlights in the car and the clean slant of a man who knows a file will be read by people looking for holes. Claire met him at the door with the same polite focus she'd had at the clinic. The look of a person who doesn't want to waste a professional's time. Ella's at Mrs. Bennett's, she said before he could ask. She likes to help feed the cat. Good. Miguel stamped snow from his boots. The furnace breathed a warm hello. The lemon of Claire's counter cleaner felt like summer pulled tight around a table. He set the envelope down and sat across from her. "These are copies," he said, tapping the cassettes. "Redacted only for names of unrelated tenants. I'll include transcripts in the logbook. You can listen now or later. My advice? Don't listen alone if you don't have to. Claire." Smiled a brittle little smile. "I'm better with hearing than waiting." Miguel nodded as if he understood something deeper inside that sentence than she had said. He took a small portable player from his bag, a cheap plastic thing with a speaker the size of a cookie, and slid in Mabra 1 Klein. He pressed play. Hiss first, the fragile ribbon of tape catching its breath. Then Miguel's own voice, calm and low, reading the formalities. Mrs. Klein's answering, "I do," thinner and older through the tiny speaker. The recorder made every room sound crowded. You could hear the kettle sigh, the scratch of a cardigan sleeve. Then the words Claire had been preparing to hear all day, and somehow not at all. Raised voices on Sundays. A little girl crying. Not a tantrum, tired. She pressed her fingertips to the table's edge until the pads went white. Miguel clicked the stop button before the end. "We can pause," he said. "Play it," Claire said softly. He pressed again. Mrs. Klein's voice went, "Careful and precise, old water. Houses that smelled like they needed to breathe." Claire thought of the roach in the baggie in the evidence folder, the way it had looked like a drawing of itself. She felt tears climb in the slow, determined way of winter bodies. Not dramatic, just true. When Miguel swapped in number 2, Romero, and Anita's kitchen came through, baby size, the hum of a refrigerator, a woman's brisk kindness, the tears finally reached her mouth and didn't stop. Anita said Jimmy like a fact. Headphones, consoles, crackers, weekends. Bugs don't read leases. Claire covered her eyes with the flats of her hands and let the sound wash whatever it was washing. She wasn't crying for evidence. The folder held that. She was crying because adults lived the way adults lived, and small bodies swallowed the consequences. She cried because she loved a man once who had not become a villain so much as a child. In the wrong body, stubborn with pride and drowning with it. She cried because a 6-year-old had to draw her fear as a room she refused to enter. Miguel clicked off the player and let the quiet grow back around them, respectful of its shape. "I'll file these tonight," he said after a time. "Tomorrow, I'll request maintenance logs and the landlord's pest remediation schedule. Dr. Chen will have preliminary stool results in a day or two. We'll keep you in the loop," Claire nodded, pressing the heel of one hand under one eye like a woman trying to stop a faucet. "Thank you. Remember," he said gently, "you don't need to warn or confront anyone. That's my piece. Keep doing what you're doing. Document, care for Ella, keep her routine steady. Kids take their weather from us." "She's at Mrs. Bennett's," Claire said again, as if to remind herself. "Eating graham crackers with the cat." Miguel smiled. The small human kind a person allows himself after a long day of other people's lives. He stood, zipped his coat, and left her with the little machine and its 2 plastic hearts. She didn't play them again. She put them in the folder, labeled the folder with the date, and placed it on the highest pantry shelf where Ella couldn't reach. Then she stood at the sink and let the water run over her hands until the heat stung, and numbness argued with feeling. Outside, the porch light caught the snow at angles that made each flake look like evidence, falling toward the earth. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, Montpellier Exchange. "Hello? Claire?" The voice braided impatience and care so tightly the rope could moor a ship. "It's Ruth. I'm at the station. Bus got in early. I told you Burlington wasn't Mars." Claire closed her eyes. Relief came like warmth, like soup, like a blanket that had never seen a basement. "Ruth, I can get a cab," Ruth said, already solving problems. "But if you're free, I'm coming," Claire said. She reached for her coat. "The porch light will be on." The bus hissed like an animal settling into sleep, and Ruth Reed stepped down with the implacable care of someone who had walked too quickly through too many winters. Her wool coat was the kind hard winters earn. Her gray hair was pinned in a way that told you she was finished being swayed by wind. When Claire waved from the curb, Ruth lifted her hand, and for a foolish second Claire wanted to lay her cheek in that palm the way a child does. You look tired, Ruth said, climbing into the Subaru. Tired and brave. Both can be true, Claire said, starting the car. Thank you for coming. Burlington's not Mars, Ruth said, the line lighter than the eyes behind it. We get off at Main Street just like anywhere. At the house, Claire made soup because warmth had to start somewhere. Ruth ate like a nurse, grateful, efficient, noting the details of a room without seeming to. She asked about Ella in a way that made space for answers. Claire told her everything. Dr. Chen, the ultrasound, the stool kits in the fridge, the water samples, Miguel's tapes, the roach in the baggie on the pantry shelf. Ruth listened, hands wrapped around the warm bowl, and finally said, "Tomorrow I want to see Jason." Claire nodded. Relief prickled behind her eyes like thaw. The next morning, the air was the kind that snaps when you breathe. Ruth's breath rose like small ghosts as they walked down the slope to the side entrance of Jason's building. Claire let Ruth knock. The chain slid, the same pause. Then Jason opened the door, face already braced. "Mom," he said, the word small with surprise and old habits. "Jason," Ruth said, and stepped past him like a tide. The basement met her with its damp and its apology. She stopped in the little living room and looked around. Not a nosy look, not an accusatory look, an assessment. Jason's chin went up. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said, and heard it land. Ruth turned to him, eyes steady. "Con jang lam gi voi joy min, voi con gai qua con." The Vietnamese came out of her with a nurse's clean edge and a mother's. The words she had used when he was young and testing the stove. "What are you doing with your life? With your daughter?" Jason blinked. "Mom," she lifted a palm. "Not to shame you," she said. "To stop you. Those are different." He worked his jaw. Pride stood up inside him again, tall and fragile. "You don't know what it's like down here, the landlord." "I know basements," Ruth said softer, "and landlords, and how long it takes a mold spore to grow when the fan is broken. I know water that comes out the color of tea. What I don't know is why you didn't call me and say, 'Mom, this is bigger than me.'" "Because I'm not a boy," Jason said, the words both defense and prayer. "Because I'm supposed to handle it. And because you're my son and stubbornness runs on our side like maple sap," Ruth said, not unkind. She stepped close and touched his sleeve the way you touch a bandage to check if it holds. "I see that you love her. I also see that love is not enough if the water makes her sick." He looked away first. "I've been applying for things," he said. "Lists, forms, it's a flood. And sometimes I need someone to watch her so I can work a shift or go stand in a line." "Jimmy," Ruth said, making the name a question and not a charge. Jason flinched. "He's a kid. He said he'd help for cheap. It's not." Ruth didn't press the soft place. "We'll talk about childcare," she said. "Right now, show me the kitchen." He did. Ruth opened cupboards, leaned into the sink, tested. The tap. The water ran clear today, but the lines in the basin told a different story. Faint brown crescents where last week's tea had dried into evidence. She squatted and put a finger to the cabinet's swollen particle board, where a drip had been rehearsing its role all winter. She didn't scold. She took out her phone and photographed what a nurse photographs when she has no chart to write in. Tile lines, vent grills, a dehumidifier that hadn't yet arrived. She asked Jason for the landlord's number and the maintenance log. When he couldn't produce the latter, she wrote down the dates he remembered calling. "We'll corroborate," she said. She had spent 40 years deciphering what people said under the things they said. It was a kind of translation. "Let me help," she added. No shame in a mother showing up. Jason's shoulders sagged. For a moment, Claire saw the boy he had been, standing in a kitchen with a report card he didn't want to explain. He nodded once. At Claire's house that night, Ruth sat on Ella's carpet and built a city out of blocks, tunnels and bridges and a small safe house with a fence. Ella assembled animals in pairs as if preparing an ark. When bedtime came, Ella held her belly with that absent, practical hand Claire had come to hate. Ruth noticed without speaking. As the house settled and the furnace took another breath, Ella called softly from the doorway. "Grandma Ruth?" Ruth rose, joints complaining, and met her in the hall. "Yes, darling. Can you sit with me a minute? My tummy is thinking." "I can," Ruth said. She sat on the edge of the bed and laid a cool hand on Ella's forehead. The way mothers and nurses measure without instruments. Ella turned to her side and curled. After a while, her breathing lengthened, but her hand stayed on her belly like she was keeping a promise. Ruth waited until sleep had set its hook, then tucked the quilt under the small shoulder and stood to click off the lamp. Something rustled in the pocket of Ella's backpack where it leaned against the dresser. Not alive. Paper against paper. Ruth frowned and, careful not to wake the child, lifted the bag to the hallway. Inside, under Mr. Otter and a penguin pajama top, she found a little zipper pouch with cartoon stars. Inside the pouch were 2 flat blister packets, green and white, adult branded. Imodium AD, 2 pills gone, 2 remaining. There was also a strip of chewable pink tablets labeled bismuth subsalicylate, broken in half, and a folded napkin, with a child's careful knot. Ruth turned one blister strip over. "For adults and children 6 years and older," the print said. "But every nurse knows labels and life have a distance between them. Loperamide is not a plan for giardia. In a 6-year-old, it can turn a body into a stuck river." She slid the packets into a clean sandwich bag and sealed the top. On the outside, she wrote with Claire's fine-tip Sharpie, "Anti-diarrheals found in child's backpack. Unknown administration. Date, time." She tucked the bag into the folder marked Evidence and set the folder back on the high shelf, her hand steady. Back at the bedroom door, she watched Ella sleep. "No more secrets in little pockets," she whispered to the quiet house. In the kitchen, Claire waited with 2 mugs of chamomile. Ruth set the bag on the table between them like a small, undeniable country. Found in her backpack, Ruth said, "This is how she gets through Sundays." Claire's face folded. She kept it together the way single mothers learn to, by closing one valve at a time. "Who?" "Doesn't matter yet," Ruth said gently. "We'll ask, we won't accuse, but we will tell Dr. Chen and Miguel. This is not what you do with a child who's fighting a parasite." Claire nodded hard, anger and grief a braided rope in her hands. "She's 6, she said, and the words were a plea to no one and everyone. Ruth reached across the table and covered Claire's hand. "I'm here now," she said. "I will stand in whatever doorway needs a person. I can supervise visits, sit on couches, watch meals get cooked. I will be the boring, relentless grandmother every good story needs." Claire laughed, a wild, grateful sound that tasted like salt. "You would? I should have been here sooner," Ruth said, turning the truth toward herself like a lamp. "After the divorce, I told myself to let him learn. What I did was let him drown too far from shore. That's on me. But the good thing about a shore is you can still stand on it and wade in." They sat a while without talking, listening to the house keep them. The next afternoon, as a sky the color of a tin cup lowered itself over the neighborhood, Miguel knocked with a clipboard and a thick manila envelope. He stood in the doorway with his pea-coat open, and a look that was not triumph and not defeat, just the face of a man who moves the next piece into place. "I've compiled the initial logbook," he said, setting the envelope on the table. "Chronology, medical notes from Dr. Chen, water results, interviews. It's the spine of the case so far." He glanced at Ruth, then back to Claire. "And I hear we may have a new piece of evidence." Ruth slid the sandwich bag across the table. Miguel picked it up with the care you give a fragile truth. "We'll document chain of custody," he said, already uncapping his pen, "and we'll add it to the log." Claire looked from the envelope to the bag to the sleeping shape of her daughter on the couch, Mr. Otter tucked under her arm. The line from despair to action, the line Ruth had walked in on, the line Miguel was drawing on paper, felt visible now, something you could balance on if you kept your eyes up. "Tomorrow," Miguel said, "I'll file the logbook formally." He tapped the envelope, a small, decisive sound. "And then we keep going." The logbook arrived in a manila envelope with a rubber band tight enough to leave a welt. Miguel set it on Claire's kitchen table like a careful brick. Snow pebbled his peacoat and melted on the wood, making dark commas. "This is the spine," he said, palms flat, voice low so as not to wake Ella napping with Mr. Otter on the couch. "Chronology, interviews, environmental sampling, medical cross-references. It's not a verdict, it's a record." Claire slid a butter knife under the flap and lifted out a stack bound with a blue clip. The first page wore the state seal, and the title in black type, Department for Children and Families. Case log, Reed Monroe. Below, a line for prepared by Miguel Alvarez, LCSW. She turned the page. The entries were time-stamped, neat, each paragraph an attempt at order in a winter that was not interested in it. 1201-09-15. Report received from Dr. Naomi Chen, Pediatrics. Recurrent GI symptoms in minor. Ella Reed 6. Pattern noted. Following alternate weekend visitation with father, Jason Reed. Ultrasound evidence of bowel wall thickening. Stool O&P ordered. Pending. 2001-1410. Initial interview with mother, Claire Monroe, at residence. Home clean, adequate heat. No environmental hazards observed. Mother maintains contemporaneous journal of symptoms of food intake. So 2-1042. Home visit at father's basement unit. Observed. Dampness odor. Black mold along grout base in bathroom. Ceiling tile staining. Cabinet particle board swelling under sink. Water from kitchen tap initially tea-colored. Cleared after flow. Chain of custody samples collected. Kitchen tap, bath sink, shower. Photographs taken, file refs, WERO 2A02F. To us, WERO 2, 1750, lab call, preliminary, kitchen tap, bath sink positive for Giardia antigen, EIA. Shower sample high turbidity, cyst concentration pending. Landlord contacted for maintenance logs. Dehumidifier delivery scheduled. 203-11 sign. Collateral interview Mar 1, Klein, upstairs. Reports raised voices on Sundays, child crying, tired not tantrum, odor old water. 1203-1215, collateral interview number 2, Romero across hall. Reports presence of Jimmy, male, or 18 to 19, frequently babysitting while father absent, video game consoles, crackers for meals, observed roach in bathroom. 03-1635. Non-leading interview with minor at mother's home. Child statements, the couch is cold. Blanket smells like downstairs old water. Jimmy plays games. He doesn't make dinner because the pan is dirty. Child voluntary drawing, depicting insects around sleeping area. Siu Zo 4, 1920. Evidence logged. Deceased roach recovered from child's sweater hem. Anti-diarrheal medications. Loperamide, bismuth subsalicylate, found in child's backpack, unknown. Administration. Claire read the lines twice, mouth drying as if the words pulled moisture from the room. The clinical language did not blunt the edges. It sharpened them. Each observation, neat, impersonal, dropped a tiny anchor into the same cold fact. This had been going on longer than anyone wanted to say out loud. "We'll add Dr. Chen's lab results as soon as they're final," Miguel said. "If Giardia shows on the stool antigen, as I expect, it will corroborate the environmental finding. We don't need it to act, but it helps." Ruth, sleeves rolled to mid-forearm like always, leaned over Claire's shoulder and read, silently. "You're thorough," she said to Miguel, approving hardness in her voice that nurses save for competence. "That log reads like a chart." "It's meant to," he said. "A court likes lines it can follow." Lines had been hard to follow. In the main office that week, the elementary school worked like a heart when everyone showed up on time. When they didn't, the rhythm stuttered. On Tuesday, Claire had left at 9 for Dr. Chen and returned at 11 with cheeks pinched by wind and mind humming with lab codes. On Wednesday, she answered Miguel's call outside the copy room, while the giant printer coughed out homework packets. And on Thursday, she left at noon to pick up Ella early after the nurse called about a low-grade fever. By Friday, the principal, Called her into the small conference room that smelled like dry erase markers and worn carpet. "I'm not unsympathetic," said Ms. Hargreaves, a trim woman with a teacher's posture and a mother's crow's feet. "But we need coverage. You're critical in the mornings when buses come in. We're juggling paras, sub-plans, the whole tree, Claire." "I know," Claire said, swallowing 1,000 explanations and leaving the one that mattered. "My daughter is sick." "I've noticed," Hargreaves said, softer. "Talk to HR. There's intermittent FMLA. There's donated leave. Paperwork, I know. But you can't keep white-knuckling this week to week. It's not good for you either." Claire nodded, feeling the admirable weight of being told to accept help. She left with a packet that said Notice of Rights in bold and a list of numbers with extensions that felt as long as winter. In the car, she stared at the HR cover sheet until the text doubled. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and breathed the smell of old coffee. Jason's week did not go more gracefully. A printed notice appeared on his door. Unit 0B, Tenant Responsibilities. He crumpled it in his fist and threw it at the sink, where it landed in an old pan like a paper flower. Twice someone banged on the wall. The second time it was Anita from across the hall. "You can't leave her alone, Jason," she said through the door. "Even to run to the bodega. You can't." "I didn't," he lied, then disliked the way the lie tasted. It was 10 minutes. 10 minutes on a winter stairway is a long time for a 6-year-old, Anita said, Mercy and steel braided. "Call your mother. Call somebody." He didn't answer. He sat on the edge of the folded couch and stared at the rectangle where Ella's blanket would be, and felt the shape of his pride like a bruise he kept pressing. He thought of Ruth's hand on his sleeve, and of the housing application he had submitted at 1 a.m. 3 nights ago, after the building went quiet and his head went loud. At home, Claire tried to braid her own ropes tighter. She rose earlier and laid out clothes the night before. She put the stool kits in a labeled corner of the fridge like soldiers. She watched the clock's hands climb and clicked through HR forms while soup simmered. She wrote emails with sentences that sounded professional from a woman whose whole brain was a small sleeping figure on the couch. She wrote in the moleskin after Ella went to bed and stopped pretending the habit was just for court. Time to 05. Ella to bed 7:20. Held belly. Woke 01:10 with cramp. No fever. 2 Oz water, back to sleep after 12 minutes. Appetite okay at dinner, 1-2 bowl soup, plus 2 crackers. Energy fair. Reports, air fuzzy on my teeth when asked about Dad's house. When she put the pen down, her hand shook from the inside. Ruth poured tea and made her sit while it cooled. "You cannot hold your breath for 3 months, Ruth said, voice kind like a rope thrown to a swimmer. "You'll pass out. Breathe between strokes." On Sunday night, an email arrived from Ms. Winters, the attorney Claire had hired after an evening in October, when she realized Love would not negotiate for her. The subject line felt like a gavel. Preliminary hearing, notice and prep. "We've received a date. Monday, 12/18, 9 a.m., Family Court, Judge Harmon. Please gather the following: medical summaries, Dr. Chen, CPS logbook excerpts, Miguel to submit, environmental lab results, evidence chain, Roach, meds, and any work attendance documentation impacting childcare. Optional. We'll meet Thursday at 4:30 to prep testimony. I expect father will contest. Anticipate questions motive, custody interference. Stay factual. Let the paper speak." Claire read it twice, then forwarded it to Ruth with a subject that said simply, "Here we go." She texted Miguel, who replied within 3 minutes. "I'll file the logbook to the docket tomorrow and send you the stamped copy. Dr. Chen is ready with her affidavit. We've got you." At bedtime, Ella pressed her cheek to Claire's shoulder and mumbled through the heavy-lidded truth of small children. "Do we have to go to the room with the chairs again?" she asked, meaning court from that one day months ago when a cousin had a custody hearing Claire had once attended in a younger life. "Maybe for a little while," Claire said, because she had begun to see how much a child can hold of a hard thing if you hand it in pieces. But you won't have to talk if you don't want to. Grown-ups will do the talking. Okay, Ella said, and fell asleep between words. Monday came with a sky the color of unpolished spoons. Claire took an early meeting with Ms. Hargreaves to file the first HR form, and then stopped by Dr. Chen's office to pick up a signed summary. Dr. Chen's affidavit was precision on 2 pages, clinical terms, dates, an unruffled line about mandated reporting. Claire slid it into a sleeve in a blue binder Ruth insisted they use, tabs labeled medical, environmental, interviews, evidence, work. Miguel texted a photo of the logbook stamped cover, filed, before lunch. He added a message. Court likes clean. Keep answers short. You know the facts better than anyone. Jason received his own notice white envelope with the county's return address. He opened it at the counter, elbows on pressboard, and stared at the date until the numbers lost their shape. He called Ruth, hung up twice and then didn't. When she answered, he didn't apologize the way people do when they need to ask a thing. He asked, "I'll be there," Ruth said, "and I'll sit with you if you let me." He said okay, in a voice that was old and 16 and 8. And after he hung up, he washed the one pan twice and thought of crackers and decided on eggs. That night, Claire set the blue binder on the kitchen table like a ship's log. Ruth laid the bagged roach on top and then slid it gently beneath, as if to spare Claire's eyes. Outside, the porch light carved a circle in the snow. Inside, the furnace breathed its steady, ordinary breath. Tomorrow and the next day would be for prep. Monday would be for telling a room with chairs the story the papers already knew. Claire rinsed 2 mugs and set them upside down to dry, then checked on Ella one more time, and at the bedroom door, felt the familiar tug, fear and resolve braided like a winter rope, and chose the latter, if only by a strand. On we go, Ruth said softly from the hall. On we go, Claire answered and shut off the light. The family courthouse wore winter like a second skin, marble floors that held the cold, radiators that clicked but never quite sang. Claire sat at counsel table with Ms. Winters, and the blue binder Ruth had tabbed into order, its spine squared to the edge as if neatness could steady weather. Across the aisle, Jason straightened his thrift store tie until it pinched. Ruth sat in the first row behind Claire, a handkerchief folded into a clean square on her lap. Miguel Alvarez took the seat near the aisle, case jacket tidy, and Dr. Naomi Chen waited by the door, coat folded over her arm, eyes clear. In the back row, Ella colored with fierce concentration on a clipboard, permitted for now under the watch of a bailiff with a kind jawline, because childcare had fallen through in the blizzard, and Judge Harmon had said, with a look that meant, both compassion and boundaries, "We'll keep her for the preliminaries only." "All rise," called the clerk when the door behind the bench swung open. Judge Harmon, silver hair, keen eyes, the kind of posture that made grown men recalibrate their sentences, took her seat and looked down at the file. Her glasses slid to the end of her nose, then climbed back with one finger. "Good morning," she said, and the room made the small, respectful noises that count as greeting in court. "This is the matter of Reed vs. Monroe. Preliminary hearing on temporary orders. Counsel, appearances, please." Ms. Winters stood. "For Ms. Monroe, Your Honor." She gestured to Claire, whose name sounded strange in a room that insisted on surnames. Jason's lawyer, young, over-buttoned, rose. "For Mr. Reed. And we have representatives from DCF," the judge said, nodding toward Miguel. "And Dr. Naomi Chen by subpoena. Thank you for attending." Her gaze moved to the gallery and softened a notch at the sight of Ella, then sharpened back to the papers. "Let's proceed." Ms. Winters did not waste time. "Your Honor, we are asking for temporary orders suspending overnight visitation, pending remediation of environmental hazards at Mr. Reed's residence, and for supervised day contact at a neutral site or, with the court's permission in the presence of a designated family member. We will demonstrate a pattern of gastrointestinal illness corresponding to alternate weekend visitation and provide environmental testing and collateral interviews corroborating unsafe conditions. Very well, Judge Harmon said. Show me the paper. The paper came like snowflakes that wanted to be stones. Ms. Winters slid copies to the clerk in the bench. Exhibit A, Dr. Chen's affidavit with ultrasound stills clipped to the back, grainy. Loops of gut with the neat annotation, bowel wall thickening, free fluid mild. Exhibit B, the lab report, kitchen tap, Giardia antigen positive. Bath sink, Giardia antigen positive. Shower, turbidity flagged, cyst quant pending. Exhibit C, the logbook excerpts, time-stamped, polite, relentless. Exhibit D, the tiny sandwich bag with the dead roach, admitted over defense counsel's objection, for the limited purpose of documenting pests, the judge said, one eyebrow up at the absurdity of having to say it. Dr. Chen took the stand and swore to tell the truth, voice steady in the sing-song cadence that makes oaths feel like strange nursery rhymes. Ms. Winters kept her questions clean. Doctor, what did you observe? Abdominal distension and tenderness in a 6-year-old with intermittent low-grade fever, Dr. Chen said, calm as a tide. Point-of-care ultrasound suggested inflammation consistent with enteric infection. I ordered stool antigen testing for Giardia and Cryptosporidium and a standard ova and parasites exam. I also reviewed the medical record, which shows 2 urgent care visits for abdominal pain on Mondays following weekends with Mr. Reed. And based on your training and experience, does the water testing obtained by DCF correspond to a plausible source? Yes, Dr. Chen said. Giardia is transmitted through contaminated water. The antigen-positive tap samples are concerning. Miguel took the stand next, badge shining a little under the fluorescence. He spoke in the same reasonable tone he had used at Claire's table. He described the basement, the damp smell, the black mold along the grout, the ceiling tile stains, the pressboard swollen like a sponge. He read from his logbook without flourish. He said chain of custody the way you say please pass the salt, ordinary and exact. He played 30 seconds of Mrs. Klein's tape consent and 2 sentences of Anita Romero's voice before the judge lifted a hand. I've read the transcripts, Mr. Alvarez, she said. I accept them. Thank you. Jason's lawyer rose like a spring. Your Honor, if I may, we do not dispute that the building has had maintenance issues. This is an old structure in winter, but Mr. Reed has repeatedly asked for repairs. He loves his daughter and would never knowingly expose her to harm. The coincidences are unfortunate. They are not causation. This is the mother leveraging bureaucracy to limit contact. Claire felt the words like small stones in a pocket. Ms. Winters put a hand on the table without touching her. Judge Harmon turned her attention to Jason, who had been fidgeting with a pen cap until it clicked like a metronome for nerves. Mr. Reed, I'm going to ask you some questions directly, she said, not unkindly. Stand, please. Jason stood, cleared his throat, and tried out honesty like a jacket he wasn't sure fit. Yes, Your Honor. Do you dispute that the water in your unit has at times been discolored? The judge asked. It comes out brown and then it's fine, he said. Sometimes I boil it, sometimes I buy bottled. It's not like... He stopped himself from saying poison because the word had too much heat. Do you dispute that? There is mold in your bathroom? I clean it, he said, and flushed at how small the answer sounded. Do you dispute that your daughter has been ill after weekends with you? His knuckles were white on the pen. She's a sensitive kid. It's winter. Kids get sick. And do you dispute, Judge Harmon said, taking a stone from the pile and weighing it in her hand, that an 18-year-old named Jimmy has watched Ella at your residence while you were absent? Defense counsel began to stand. Jason put a hand out to stop him. The room tightened. Ruth's handkerchief rustled in her fist. In the back row, a crayon paused. Your Honor, Jason said, voice catching on the ledge between defiance and something else. I work nights sometimes. I can't afford a sitter. He swallowed. Pride made a final stand, and then, exhausted, sat down. Yes, he said louder, like the word needed to be heard. Jimmy is my neighbor's son. He's 18. He sits with her when I go to a shift or the store. The room made a soft, collective intake of breath. The bailiff shifted. Ms. Winter's pen stopped moving. Miguel's face didn't change, but he wrote the time in the margin anyway, as if the admission wanted a line to stand on. Judge Harmon took a moment before she spoke, the patience of someone who has seen 100 versions of the same sentence and still treats each like a life. "Mr. Reed," she said, "do you understand that leaving a 6-year-old in the care of an unscreened teenager with no demonstrated capacity to provide safe child care, particularly in a residence with known environmental hazards, is a serious lapse in judgment?" "Yes," he said, eyes on the wood grain of counsel table like it could be a map out. "I mean, I know it now. I thought it was better than leaving her alone." "In some choices," Judge Harmon said, "the opposite of bad is worse." Ella's crayon rolled off the clipboard and clicked on the floor. Heads turned involuntarily, adults and judge alike. The bailiff bent to pick it up and handed it back with a whisper. Ella, who had been very good at being tiny, very good at holding her weather, looked up at the big room with its lights and seals and said, before any adult could stop it from happening, "I'm scared of that dark house." Silence rang like a tuning fork. Courtrooms do not like children's sentences because they carry no hedge. They arrive without a lawyer, without a citation, and land where they land. Judge Harmon's face softened in the way that belongs only to people who have taught for a long time or wiped a lot of tears. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, gentle, and nodded at the bailiff. "Let's have her step out now." Ruth rose at once, hand out. Ella took it and went, small boots careful on tile. The door closed softly. The air in the room reorganized itself around the absence of a child. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, voice now full bench again, "you will answer one more question from me. When you left your daughter with this young man, did you leave instructions about meals, about water, about what to do if she became ill?" Jason opened his mouth and closed it. The version of the story where he had was not available to him. He shook his head once. "No," he said, a small sound that was still a confession. Ms. Winters didn't look at Claire. She didn't have to. The judge wrote something in the file with the slow deliberation of a person chiseling. "Here is what I'm going to do," Judge Harmon said, voice crisp. "Effective today, overnight visitation is suspended. Mr. Reed will have supervised day contact at the Family Resource Center twice weekly. DCF will monitor compliance and continue environmental testing. If Mr. Reed secures safe housing, demonstrates appropriate child care arrangements, and provides proof of remediation, we will revisit. I want a review in 30 days. Counsel will draft the order." Defense counsel started to speak and thought better of it. Jason sat, a man who had spent all his pride, and found himself still standing. The clerk called the next case. Paper shuffled. The hiss of winter under the doors returned. Claire closed the blue binder like a book at the end of a hard chapter and stood. She felt light and heavy at once. Relief had a weight when you knew it had been purchased on a child's. In the hallway, Ruth sat with Ella on a bench beneath a bulletin board of flyers. AA meetings, food pantry hours, a flyer for a winter coat drive. Ella leaned into Ruth's side and traced the raised letters on a braille sign with one finger, intrigued by a language she could feel. Jason came out a minute later, face drained of color that wasn't windburn. He looked at Claire as if a dozen words were crowding the doorway of his mouth and only one could fit. "I left her with Jimmy," he said again, this time to the person who most deserved to hear it. "I did that. I was tired. I thought it would be okay for an hour. Then it wasn't an hour," he swallowed. I didn't know how to say I was failing." Ruth watched him with a nurse's mercy. Claire felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the knowledge that the next chapter would not just be about court orders. It would be about how a man tells the truth about himself and what he does after. "Then start now," she said quietly. Jason nodded like a person who had found a ladder in a hole and decided to try the first rung. "Okay," he said. "I will." The courthouse hallway emptied the way winter fields do, slowly, then all at once. Claire stood with the blue binder pressed flat to her ribs, feeling the echo of Ella's sentence in her sternum. Ruth sat beside, Ella tying a scarf with the calm economy of a nurse changing a dressing. Down the corridor, Jason leaned his shoulder against the painted cinder block and stared at a vending machine like it might tell him what to do. Ms. Winters slipped paperwork into a leather folio. "You did well," she told Claire, voice pitched. "For weather and legal corridors. The order is temporary. We'll get the written version by end of day. Review in 30. Miguel approached with his case jacket and a thermal mug that had probably held bad coffee for a decade of other people's mornings. "I'll coordinate the supervised visits at the Family Resource Center until anything else is approved," he said. Two 2-hour blocks a week to start. We'll handle pickup and drop-off protocols. No food or drink from the basement unit. Water will be provided on site." Claire nodded, and then realized she was already moving toward Jason. She did not know what she meant to say until she was standing with him, and the vending machine lit her from the chin in a poor approximation of grace. He beat her to the first sentence. "I'm not a bad man," he said, voice scraped raw. "I'm not—" He fumbled for a word he would not let be evil, villain, monster. He found another, smaller and truer. "I just failed." He didn't try to make it into a preface, for an excuse. He let it stand, and then, like a man who understands that confessions sometimes need roots to hold, he started at the beginning. "Last March," he said, eyes on the orange coil holding a pack of gum like fate. "The firm downsized. Legal assistance. First, it was a Thursday. I remember because I'd worn the blue shirt. I thought if I looked sharp I'd be safe, like clothes could be armor. A breath that wanted to be a laugh and wasn't. By May, I was down to socks with no mates and coffee on a credit card. I took the basement because it was cheap and it was available. I told myself it would be temporary. Temporary can grow roots. You don't see until you trip over them." He tucked his hands into the pockets of a thrifted coat, as if to keep them from fidgeting. "The water came out brown sometimes and then it ran clear, and I told myself clear meant fine. I wiped the grout and said the black came back because winter came back. I made a chart with jobs and numbers, and when the lists didn't move, I started picking up graveyard shifts at the convenience store. I told myself it was fine if Jimmy watched her because he was right there and because it was only an hour, and then it was 2. I told myself crackers count as food when you're tired. I told myself a lot of things." In the retelling, Claire saw flashes she had not been in the room to witness. Jason folding a rejection letter into eighths until it was a thumbprint-sized square. Jason pressing a towel to the bathroom corner where the wall had bloomed. Jason standing in front of a mirror practicing, "We're okay," until it sounded almost true. "I didn't call my mother," he said, and now he looked over Claire's shoulder to where Ruth stood, straight as a staff in her winter coat. "Because I was 38 and stubbornness runs on our side like maple sap, and because I thought being a father and asking for help were opposites." Ruth stepped forward, the hallway light tracing the silver in her hair. "They aren't," she said. She did not put a hand on him. She did something harder. She put the truth on herself first. "And I did not help you learn that. After the divorce, I told myself to step back and let you build your own house. You were hurt, and I was proud, and we both mistook distance for respect. I should have visited. I should have looked at pipes and grout. I should have asked you the kinds of questions I ask patients. Where does it hurt? How long has it been hurting? Are you sleeping? I waited for you to ask. You wouldn't. That's on both of us." Jason stared at the floor. "I thought you'd tell me to move home." "I might have," Ruth said. "And if I had, you'd be resenting me instead of listening to me. So let's call that even and start from what is." She lifted her chin toward Miguel. "I'm here, I will supervise. I will sit in whatever cold waiting room or small apartment the court allows, and watch him feed his child a proper meal and wash a proper pan with proper water. I'll bring my license and my background check and a notebook you can photocopy. I'll write down what's eaten and what's not. I'll note bathroom trips and hand washing and bedtime. I won't interfere except when safety requires it. I will be boring and relentless and on time." Miguel looked genuinely relieved. The kind of relief that comes when an unpredictable data set acquires a dependable variable. The department permits a designated community supervisor with court approval, he said. We run a criminal background check, require a brief training on supervised visitation guidelines, and provide a form, observation log. No coaching, no whispering answers, no trips outside agreed locations. If Dr. Chen approves the site for day contact, say, Mr. Reed's unit wants water is not in question, or we keep it at the center, we can start next week. Ms. Winters? Ms. Winters had been listening with the cheerful ruthlessness of someone who arranges facts like dominoes and then looks for wind. We can propose an interim order with named supervision by Ms. Reed, she said, already jotting phrases. Attach her nursing license, background check receipt, and an affidavit. It's less adversarial when it comes from us first. Claire felt the binder's hard edge through her coat. Something in her loosened in a way that wasn't quite forgiveness, and wasn't far from it. It was what you give someone when you decide to move forward with them instead of away. Room. Ella wants to see you, she said to Jason, because it was the thing that kept stepping into the room no matter who talked. She also wants to be safe. Those things don't conflict if we do this right. Jason nodded, the motion small and careful, as if enthusiasm might startle the moment. I'll do what they say, he said. Then, the sentence that sounded like a man putting down a box he'd been carrying too long alone. I'll let you help me. Ruth's eyes shone in the way that belongs to people who have allowed themselves to be useful again, after a season of withholding. Good, she said. We're done with secrets that try to look like pride. They stepped into the gray afternoon. The wind coming off the lake had found a new pitch, higher, urgent around corners. Claire buckled Ella into the back seat. Ruth slid in beside her and handed over a thermos of cocoa that had survived Court's metal detector. Jason stood with his hands deep in his pockets like a boy waiting his turn for the sled. At a red light, Claire's phone buzzed. An email from Dr. Chen blinked into the world. Stool antigen positive for Giardia lamblia. O&P pending. Hydration plan attached. Medication order drafted. She forwarded it to Miguel and Miss Winters without comment, and then read the hydration plan aloud to Ruth. Oral rehydration salts if needed. Bland, starchy foods. Avoid antidiarrheals. Ruth nodded along, already composing a shopping list in her head. Rice, bananas, broth, soap. Back at Claire's house, they made a practical kind of peace. Ruth spread the supervised visitation guidelines on the table and underlined nothing and everything. Sign in, sign out, she said, tapping with a capped pen. No derogatory talk about the other parent. No secrets. If an incident occurs, we write it down and notify within 24 hours. And I bring snacks I've cooked myself or food from approved lists. If he wants to cook, I watch him wash and rinse. This is not punitive. It's procedural. Procedure keeps people from improvising. In ways that hurt children, Jason came by for the first scheduled center visit and stayed for 10 minutes longer in the doorway than anyone needed him to, as if leaving without extra time would make him seem eager, and extra time might look like penance. Ella showed him the penguin sticker book like an ambassador explaining a small nation's customs. He listened with both ears. When he said goodbye, he did not promise anything he could not ensure. He said only, I'll see you Tuesday, as if the sentence were a kind of faith. That night, Claire wrote in the moleskin while the house did its faithful breathing. 12-19. Court issued temporary order suspending overnights. Supervised day contact at FRC approved. Ruth to seek approval as designated supervisor. Background check submitted. Dr. Chen's stool antigen positive for Giardia. Hydration plan attached. Ella mood improved, said Grandma Ruth sits like a wall that bugs can't climb. She closed the journal and let the pen rest in the spine. In her chest, something unclenched. It wasn't over. True crime stories never are when the crime turns out to be 100 small avoidances instead of a single large act. But action had begun to accumulate like honest snow, layer by layer, sound muffled and lines softened, The landscape made safer not by one dramatic stroke, but by the steady, unpretty work of clearing a path every morning. In the days that followed, Ms. Winters filed Ruth's affidavit. Miguel forwarded the clean background check with a thumbs up that made Ruth roll her eyes and smile anyway. The Family Resource Center penciled in 2 standing afternoons with R. Reed, GM, supervising in sturdy block letters. Jason emailed a PDF Claire would not have imagined seeing 2 weeks ago. An application confirmation number from the Housing Authority, time-stamped at 3 in the morning. They waited then. The way winter towns wait for a storm the weather says will come, by chopping kindling and making soup, and placing the shovel by the door. Judge Harmon's written order arrived by mail and email, both temporary measures set like scaffolding. The review hearing date ticked toward them on the calendar, January, when even light works harder. And somewhere in the stack of paperwork, the line that would become the next chapter waited to be read into the record. What would happen if a man who had failed did not stop at confession, but kept going? January found the courthouse colder than before, the kind of cold that made paper feel like thin ice between your fingers. Claire sat with Ms. Winters in the blue binder, Ruth behind her in a wool coat that had weathered other hard rooms. Miguel took his usual aisle seat, case jacket squared, and Jason stood with his lawyer at the opposing table, a folded letter in his pocket he kept touching like a talisman. "All rise," the clerk said, and Judge Harmon took the bench. Her gaze moved from file to faces with the same thoughtful economy as someone testing the weight of a shovel before a storm. "We're here on review," she said. "Mr. Alvarez, your update." Miguel stood. "Yes, Your Honor. For the last 30 days, contact has occurred at the Family Resource Center under supervision. No incidents. Ms. Reed," he nodded toward Ruth, "completed background and training. Her observation logs are attached as Exhibit H. Dr. Chen's follow-up notes show clinical improvement, decreased abdominal distension, increased appetite. Environmental retesting at Mr. Reed's former unit remains positive for Giardia antigen. Additionally," he glanced down at one page and allowed himself the smallest curve of a smile. "Mr. Reed has secured new housing. The unit passed a preliminary safety inspection." A soft ripple passed through the gallery. Ms. Winters slid the exhibit packet forward. Defense counsel did the same. Judge Harmon lifted Miguel's brief line from the page and made it official by reading it aloud. "Secured new housing." Jason's lawyer touched his sleeve. Jason unfroze his hand from his pocket and stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may." He unfolded the letter. "I applied for housing assistance in December. Last week, the Housing Authority offered me a subsidized 1-bedroom unit at the Pine Street Apartments. Lease signed, keys obtained." He swallowed. "It's clean. The water tests came back clear." He handed copies to the clerk. A stamped approval, a lease with his careful signature, a move-in checklist initialed in blocky letters. There was also a receipt from a licensed pest control company, a delivery ticket for a HEPA air purifier, a photo of a white ceramic filter pitcher on a counter that wasn't swollen particle board. Miguel added, "DCF conducted a site visit 2 days ago. Photos in Exhibit I, no visible mold. Functionally vented bathroom. Smoke and CO detectors present. Kitchen tap. Negative on antigen screen. Turbidity normal. Mr. Reed has mounted a hand-washing poster at the sink and posted Dr. Chen's hydration meal plan on the refrigerator." He let the last detail sit. Homes made safer by tape and lists. Dr. Chen's affidavit wrote in behind the facts. Ms. Winters highlighted 2 lines. "Ella has responded to treatment as expected for Giardia infection," it read. "I recommend avoidance of known environmental risks, continued hydration and nutrition, and close monitoring. She is medically stable for supervised day visits in a safe, clean environment." Judge Harmon rested her pen. She looked at Claire. "Ms. Monroe, do you have anything to add?" Claire kept her voice inside the narrow river of what mattered. "Ella wants to see her father," she said. "She also wants to feel safe. If this new place is what it says it is, and if Ruth is there, I can support day visits. The judge nodded, then turned to Ruth. Ms. Reed? Ruth stood like a post that knew its job. I will be there, she said. I'll keep logs, I'll keep quiet unless safety requires speaking. Judge Harmon set the pen down and laced her fingers. Here is the court's order, she said, the room shifting toward her voice. Overnight visitation remains suspended. Beginning this week, Mr. Reed may have supervised day visits of up to 5 hours at his new residence twice weekly. Supervision by Ms. Ruth Reed is approved pursuant to DCF guidelines. Mr. Reed is to provide safe meals and potable water consistent with Dr. Chen's plan. No presence of the individual known as Jimmy. DCF will conduct unannounced spot checks, including periodic water testing. We will reconvene in 30 days for reevaluation. If all goes well, we will consider expanding duration. Overnights will not be considered absent further demonstration of stable conditions and appropriate childcare planning. A dot of breath. Escaped Claire she hadn't known she was holding. The order was both more and less than comfort. Bounded, conditional, exact. It was also precisely what she'd hoped for. In the hallway, Jason stopped them with a small, crooked smile that showed both relief and gravity. Can you come see it? He asked Claire, not as a challenge, but as an invitation to witness. Claire hesitated, then nodded. Ruth'll be there, she said, and Ruth answered with the brief lift of her chin that meant of course. Pine Street Apartments didn't try to be grand. It was a low-slung building with clean hallways, laminate that looked like wood if you didn't squint too hard, and radiators that hissed the comforting hiss of working. Jason unlocked 2B and stood back. It smelled like paint and nothing else. The living room had a second-hand couch, a thrifted rug that looked vacuumed within an inch of its life, and a small bookcase already holding 2 penguin books and a puzzle, with half the pieces facing the same direction. In the little kitchen, a white pitcher sat sentry by the sink, next to a laminated hand-washing poster. Wet, lather, scrub, 20 seconds, rinse, dry, and Dr. Chen's hydration plan with Ruth's. Notes in the margin, add banana, no loperamide. I bought plates, Jason said, opening a cabinet to show 4 white dishes stacked like possibility. And this. He lifted a mesh colander. So I don't have an excuse to say the pan's dirty. Ruth checked the little bathroom with the practiced eye of an RN. Fan works, she reported. No black in the grout, towels dry. She ran the water and let it go. It ran perfectly uninteresting from the first second. She filled a glass and set it on the counter. Claire noticed without meaning to that the glass stayed clear as a winter sky. Ella arrived with Miguel for the first visit like a small inspector, hand in Ruth's. She looked around, cautious, then gravitated toward the bedroom where Jason had made a winter room, a narrow bed with fresh sheets, a quilt Ruth had pressed on him. So I sleep in a grandmother's house, he'd laughed, and a small framed picture of the aquarium jellyfish printed from Claire's phone, crooked on purpose so the world might smile back. On the dresser sat a brand new reading lamp and a white noise machine with a snowflake sticker. Can I turn it on? Ella asked, already half in love with the button. Press there, Jason said, and she did, and a soft hush came, like lake. Champlain in a storm heard from under a blanket. Hands, Ruth said gently, pointing to the sink. Ella washed, humming the ABCs, and Jason stirred a pot at the stove. Oatmeal, he said, with bananas and real eggs. He held up a carton like a man presenting evidence of conversion. They ate at the little table. Ruth noted amounts, not meaningfully, just accurately. Jason kept an eye not on the clock but on Ella's face. When she touched her belly without thinking, he asked, too quickly, "You okay?" And Ruth shot him a look that translated to, "Good question. Say, rounder next time." He corrected himself. "How's your tummy, kiddo?" And Ella shrugged and said, "Fine," and reached for more oatmeal. He exhaled like a man learning a new instrument and pleased to find sound coming out. Claire stood in the doorway for a minute longer than she had planned. She told herself she was just checking the water glass and the posted plan. She told herself, 100 practical things. What she felt, though, was stranger and simpler. The first honest draft of trust, tentative as thin ice under a cautious foot and holding anyway. Miguel's spot check the following week was so boring it made him almost giddy. He noted the water retest, still negative. The posted lists, still posted. The HEPA unit's little green light. The fact that no consoles or headphones were visible. The presence of 2 apples on the counter and a bag of rice in the pantry. He signed Ruth's observation log with a quick appreciative scribble. He did not linger. At the next review, Judge Harmon looked over a stack of clean logs and a set of photos where the most dramatic thing was a child-sized toothbrush in a cup. "All right," she said. "We'll lengthen day visits to 8 hours. Same conditions, we'll revisit overnights in another 30. The gavel didn't fall. Family court rarely gavelled. It simply kept not breaking. By February, the town learned the specific gray that comes after good news. Transparent, renewable, unflashy. Claire kept her job. HR converted her leave into something she could live with. And she learned not to take calls in the copy room, because overheard whispers made stories out of things that needed only facts. Jason kept cooking and stopped pretending crackers were dinner. Ruth kept showing up with the energy of an old lighthouse. Dr. Chen texted Claire after Ella's weigh-in with the kind of smiley face doctors permit when a curve bends back to the line where it belongs. On a Saturday near the end of the month, Claire dropped Ella off for a visit, and Jason pressed a folded receipt into her hand without ceremony. "Rent paid," he said. "On time." There was quiet pride in it, the not needing to be congratulated kind. Claire put it in the front pocket of the blue binder like a note a child brings home and you want to keep. Winter eased not so much by warming as by losing its nerve. Icicles thinned, then fell with small claps. The snowbanks in the Price Chopper lot shrank to dirty islands. March entered like a second thought and stayed. 3 months later, Burlington wore sun like something borrowed that finally fit. Ella ran in a park that had found the color green again. Her cheeks were winter apple pink and not from fever. Ruth sat on a bench, knitting needles, clicking like a metronome that had learned a happier tempo. Jason showed up with lunch that wasn't crackers. Claire watched her daughters laugh jump from the slide, and thought not of court orders but of fences where they belonged. Around parks, around yards, around children, and how sometimes a fence isn't a barrier but an agreement. The story wasn't finished. Good ones rarely are. But the chapter turned with the simple rustle of a page, and across it was written in careful, ordinary handwriting, "Review complete. Continue as planned. Reassess next month." Snow came back on a Saturday in late March, light as sifted flour, sugaring the park in a way that made Burlington feel like it remembered who it was. Children's boots stitched new paths over the old. Sleds whispered down the small hill, red and blue commas against the white. Ella ran ahead with a plastic toboggan, her scarf a stripe of cherry in the pail. Her cheeks had returned to the color people mean when they say healthy. Her steps the quick, elastic kind 6-year-olds take when the world is safe enough to hurry in. Claire watched from the bench and let the sight work on her like medicine you do not taste. Beside her, Ruth clicked knitting needles with winter's old patience, wool pooling in her lap like a small snowdrift waiting to become a hat. Jason stood at the edge of the hill, hands in his coat pockets, alert in the way of a man learning to be both sentry and playmate. When Ella called "Ready, Daddy?" he jogged alongside the sled's first push, not too close, not too far, finding the distance that meant protection without shadow. "Look at her," Ruth said softly, as if a loud voice might break whatever. Spell the afternoon had spun. Last month she drew a sun with 4 rays, today it was 12. Claire smiled. Dr. Chen sends smiley faces in text now, imagine. She thought of the curve on the growth chart bending back toward the line where it belonged, of the way Dr. Chen's voice had warmed without softening when she said, "Resolved." Across the field, Jason lifted Ella from the sled as if she were made of both porcelain and rubber, the way children are. He dusted snow from her sleeves and looked to Claire in that new way he had, checking without pleading. Claire lifted a mittened hand. Again, she called. Then cocoa. Ella corrected terms like a diplomat. Hot chocolate, she said, and flung herself down the hill again. This was the shape of their weeks now. 2 long-day visits in the Pine Street apartment with Ruth's logbook steadying them. Another in the park or at the aquarium, when weather or water felt like reminders. To be grateful, DCF had come twice unannounced and found nothing to write down, except what Miguel ended up writing anyway. Tap water clear, posted guidelines intact, no presence of Jimmy, meals visible, not theoretical. The Family Resource Center staff, who had seen every version of sorrow in every shape of building, learned Ella's penguin stories by heart, and nodded when Jason arrived on time with the right kind of snacks. They nodded when he left on time, too. Claire had learned to place her vigilance like a guardrail instead of a wall. The blue binder still lived on a high shelf, evidence sleeves flattened into quiet. The roach in its little bag seemed more like a teaching aid than a talisman now. On Sunday nights after a visit, she sometimes found herself standing at the sink without realizing it, fingers resting on the rim, listening for a sound that would not come, the muffled cough of a basement. Fan that never worked. When the silence stayed simple, she turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Cocoa? Jason said now, coming to the bench with snow on his hat, his breath making brief ghosts. In the thermos, Ruth answered, handing him the steel cylinder like passing a baton. She added to Claire, observation. Father offers beverage, uses approved container, asks grandmother to pour, grandmother approves. She didn't write it down, some jokes you keep in the air. Claire laughed anyway because the joke wound itself around relief and made something warmer. They passed cups with lids that clicked and watched Ella drink, steam fogging the rim, lashes dark with melt. Is this a picnic? She asked. It counts, Jason said. There's a blanket hiding in Grandma Ruth's bag. Ruth, who never met preparedness she didn't admire, produced a square of wool like a magician. We sit until we remember. Our toes, then you run again, she instructed, and Ella nodded solemnly as if winter had rules and children kept them. When Ella ran back to the hill, Ruth leaned closer and spoke without moving her eyes from the sled. The next review is in a week, she said. Miguel says Judge Harmon may extend to Saturdays. There's talk, only talk, of a trial overnight next month if all stays clean. Claire's stomach did the small old flip and then steadied. If, she said. If, Ruth echoed. No rush. Bridges hold better when the ice goes out first. Jason sat, cup in both hands. He didn't insert himself into a conversation that wasn't a request. He didn't offer a promise to pull the future closer. He lifted his thermos lid like a toast and said only, "Thank you, to no one and everyone." You're the one doing the cooking, Ruth said. We're just sitting on a bench and knitting judgment into hats. I burned the first oatmeal, Jason confessed, smiling in a way he would not have weeks ago. Ella told me Grandma Ruth would have stirred more. She was right, Grandma. Ruth stirs like it's a religion, Ruth said, amused. It's all in the wrist. When Ella grew pink with running again, Claire produced the surprise she had tucked against a water bottle in her pack. Draw something for the drive home? She asked, offering a small sketchbook and a pencil with penguins wearing scarves, something to put on the fridge. New chapter. Ella's face lit with the particular greed only children and artists feel. Paper's promise. She spread the blanket across her knees and began, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. The ucha. First lines were sure. A square with a peaked roof. A door, 2 windows, a narrow rectangle at the side that might be a porch. She drew a fence around the house, pickets neat and even. Enclosing the little yard with a white hush, the pencil somehow suggested even without color. Inside the fence, she placed 3 figures. A tall woman with hair drawn in careful lines, Claire, the pencil knew. A tall man whose hands were open, Jason. And a shorter woman with a bun like a cloud and something in her hands that looked suspiciously like a knitting needle, Ruth. Between them, a small figure with a wide smile and a scarf, like a flag, Ella. Jason looked away, throat clearing. Ruth sniffed and blamed cold. In the upper corner, Ella paused, pressed the pencil's point to the paper, and shaded softly. A small gray lozenge bloomed against the white. A cloud, a bruise, a remembering. She worked at it the way she had shaded the basement couch months ago, patient, precise, then stopped and blew gently, as if graphite dust were a candle that needed encouragement. "What's that?" Claire asked, careful to let curious stay, where judgment sometimes tries to sneak in. "The corner that's still not finished," Ella said matter-of-factly, as if all houses had one and the world had simply forgotten. "It's okay. It's where the snow goes when it melts." Claire felt Ruth's hand, gloved, find her sleeve and rest there. Jason rubbed his thumb along the thermos seam like he was smoothing something that wasn't metal. The wind shifted, bringing the clean metallic smell of lake ice and the faint sweetness of hot sugar from the maple booth across the street. Somewhere, a church bell counted nothing in particular. On the walk back to the car, Ella insisted on carrying the drawing in both hands, facing forward the way a child carries a birthday cake. "Don't let the fence fall," she commanded the universe, and the universe, for once, obeyed. At the car, Claire slid the sketchbook into a clear sleeve and told herself it was to keep the snow off. Ella climbed into her seat and immediately began explaining the picture to Mr. Otter, who had returned to active duty after a long rehabilitation and now wore a tiny scarf Ruth had knit. "This is our winter house," she told him, serious as judges. "Not like the old one. This one has a fence that is a hug." Jason buckled his belt and looked over the roof at Claire, a wordless check-in. She met his eyes and held them for the length of a breath. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It calendared itself. But sometimes it flickered the way porch lights do when you come home. There, then gone, then there again. And after a while, you stop noticing the flicker and call it on. "See you Tuesday," he said. "Tuesday," Claire said. Driving home. The snow fell with the dawdling confidence of a season that knows it still has a few hours left. Ella hummed in the back seat, a made-up song whose lyrics seemed to be "fence, fence, fence, fence," set to an earnest tune. At a stoplight, Claire glanced into the rear view and saw the drawing in its sleeve, angled just enough to catch a slice of gray sky. The white fence circled the figures with its pencil-sturdy promise. In the top corner, the gray spot stayed, a little weather no one had erased. It did not ruin the picture. It told the truth of it. At home, the sketch found its place on the refrigerator, between a school newsletter and a coupon for oranges. Ruth took the kettle off the boil and poured water over 2 tea bags as if ceremony were a practical thing. Jason texted a photo of his empty sink and a caption, "No excuses." Then a second of a calendar page with a rent due date circled and a check mark beside it. When the house quieted, Claire stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing again, letting her eyes rest last and longest on the gray. It held the way some pains do, not in the center but at an edge. She didn't wish it away. She didn't name it out loud. She let it belong to the picture without owning the picture. Outside, the snow made everything briefly even. Footprints last week had been a tangle. Now there were none. In the morning, there would be new tracks, obvious as testimony and delicate as secrets. Tonight, there was a fence around a house that wasn't a house but a promise. And people inside, it who were learning how to be there without breaking it. The winter room at last had become something else, a place that could hold a season and not make a child sick. The gray corner waited, as all corners do. The fence did its small quiet work, and the snow, obliging, kept falling.